Hey gang, I just wanted to make a quick video to share some studies that give us some insights into the fact that it really can vary from situation to situation whether consuming carbohydrates can magnify or improve acid reflux symptoms. I think some of this is going to surprise some people.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
And have you seen any of our other reflux videos? You've probably heard us talking about how reflux is most commonly caused by a lack of stomach acid, not too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. And there's some other possible causes. We'll touch on some of those today, and we have other videos on that. But if this idea that acid reflux is caused by not having enough stomach acid is a new idea to you, we'll put a link in the description below for our full video on why do I have acid reflux, because I'm not going to dig all the way into that right now. But it's important to understand that when we talk about some of these things that have to do with consuming carbohydrates, and is it going to magnify reflux or improve situations? And so the first study that I want to look at is the effects of modifying amount and type of dietary carbohydrate on esophageal acid exposure time and esophageal reflux symptoms. And I'll put a link to all of these studies that I talk about in the description below this video so you can dig into them a little bit more. But this was an interesting study because they took some people that were dealing with reflux and they measured their acid that was coming back up, but they also talk to them and ask them about their symptoms. And I think that both of those things can be important factors to understand what's adjusting when you're making changes. And they put different groups on different diets. They were using like a high carb and high simple carbohydrate diets. And then they were varying that. Like I'm going to do high carbs and low simple carbohydrates and lower carbs and lower simple carbohydrates. So they did a variation and they found that it was the simple carbohydrates, which are things like, sugars and, here's some, syrup kind of stuff. And here's some junk food. Most of the processed food is going to have a lot of simple carbohydrates in it, a lot of these sugars and junk. And they found that when they reduced those, that had the most improvement to these reflux symptoms, as well as reducing some of the higher carbohydrate things. And I view like this goes along with what I see with most clients who come to me with reflux issues. And I lost my voice for 8 years because of reflux, so a lot of people come to me for help with this just because I have had a lot of experience just with myself, but then other people coming to me saying, oh, you fixed that, how'd you do that? And we see a lot of people that when they reduce carbohydrates, it improves. And the reason this is because most people dealing with acid reflux that don't have enough stomach acid to trigger that lower esophageal sphincter at the bottom of the esophagus to close. Remember, that sphincter opens so food can come in, and then it's the stomach acid that triggers that valve to close. So that when there's not enough stomach acid, it doesn't trigger the valve to close, and then the small amount of acid that's in there is going to come back up and burn them, and then they feel like, oh, I have too much acid. I'm getting burned here. So then they turn that acid off altogether, and they remove that symptom. But these folks that are not having enough stomach acid usually have some type of bacterial overgrowth as well, because the stomach acid is what kills the bad guys when they come in on the food that we're eating. So what goes on with the carbohydrates is a lot of these carbs, and especially the simple sugars, can feed these bacteria and really activate them and make them active to the point where they're now creating more gases, and that creates more pressure that pushes more stuff back up. So the more you're feeding this bacterial overgrowth, either in your stomach or your small intestine, like a SIBO type issue, a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that can push, more gases up as well and create that reflux magnification issue. So a lot of people have an overgrowth there when there's not enough stomach acid. Just because the front door is open, that acid is supposed to kill these bad guys when they come in on the food that we're eating, but when there's not enough acid there, that doesn't happen, and then a person ends up with this overgrowth. So these are the folks that I see that improve a whole lot when they reduce their carbohydrate. And this scenario of a person who's having reflux also having a bacterial overgrowth is so common that in my book, when we're teaching people how to use betaine HCl to acidify the stomach enough to trigger that valve to close and stop the reflux, that we tell people when you first start doing this, don't eat carbohydrates with that meal, because those carbohydrates could feed the bacterial overgrowth, which is going to magnify the gases they're creating. And now you've added acid, and all these gases from these bacteria that are all going crazy and happy because you just gave them a cookie is going to push even more acid back up and really magnify those symptoms. So we like to see people start off using HCl while they're repairing this reflux issue to not have carbohydrates with those meals. But that doesn't mean that carbohydrates always cause acid reflux. Once a person fixes the reflux by acidifying the stomach correctly, and they've wiped out any overgrowth that's there, so it's not there causing trouble, then they can usually have carbohydrates and they don't get those reflux symptoms. So understand what's going on here when we're talking about people who improve their symptoms by reducing their carbohydrates. This is just a dietary change that a person can make. And for some people, while they're correcting digestive malfunctions, this can help relieve some of those symptoms that can come up while you're still doing the work to fix some things. So if we look at this study on a very low carbohydrate diet improves gastroesophageal reflux and its symptoms, this diet showed that it was kind of screaming at like, wow, look at the results. Everybody really improved when they went on a low carb diet. And then this other study shows effects of a ketogenic diet on gastroesophageal reflux disease. And this was more of a review of some studies. And one thing that's interesting to note is that with these studies that are showing that a very low carb diet is effective for just about everybody in the study, they were doing this study with people who were obese. And when there's a lot of excess weight there, I kind of feel like that excess weight has the ability to push on that LES for some people and kind of keep it from closing correctly to where they may have enough stomach acid, but it's just not closing because of all of that weight. So when they go on a very low carb diet or a ketogenic diet, they found that the reflux improved as they lost weight. So there could be factors involved with, when there's digestive malfunctions, there's a lot of mechanisms that can turn on that make it very easy for a person to gain weight and make it very difficult for them to lose weight. So a lot of people who end up in that obese situation often have digestive malfunctions, and one of those can be low stomach acid that would lead to acid reflux. So that's one factor to think about as well, but I think in a lot of cases, when you're losing a lot of weight, you may be pushing on that LES valve as well. So in these studies that you'll see others out there too that show that, low carb or ketogenic really help this acid reflux issue, you got to look at a few different aspects that really might be benefiting that person in that situation. Now, here's something that's really interesting and that I have seen a number of times, enough to make me want to talk about this and make sure that you're aware of this possibility. And you can look at this study on effect of high-fat, standard and functional food meals on esophageal and gastric pH in patients with gastroesophageal reflux disease. And what the study showed was that when they gave somebody a high-fat food, it had the ability to magnify the reflux symptoms for a lot of the people in this study. And this is what I have seen in my own experience, is that some people just seem to have magnified reflux when they have a really high-fat meal. It just seems to have the ability to loosen up that LES valve a little bit where it doesn't close as tightly, and then that acid is going to come back up and burn them. So don't get me wrong. I've seen a lot of people on a high-fat, ketogenic diet that have done very well and improved their reflux and removed it altogether by doing this. So don't view this as high fat as bad for reflux, but I've seen a number of clients where they really found that if they went into an extreme ketogenic diet, that their reflux really magnified, and when they went off keto, it improved and went away. I've seen some clients that had to include some carbohydrates, like maybe just some fruit. Like, this guy just needs to have like half an apple with his lunch, and then he doesn't have reflux, and he doesn't even need to have carbs all day. He just needs to keep himself out of that state of ketosis. And in that situation where you're really having a lot of dietary fat, to make a ketogenic diet work really well, a lot of people need to really increase their fat. And on some of those studies, they were calling it a very low carb diet, but they didn't necessarily give the macros of how much fat they were doing. A lot of people just say, remove all your carbs and now you're on a ketogenic diet. And that's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people won't go into ketosis in that situation. They need to really raise their saturated fats that they're consuming to really go into a good state of ketosis. So I just kind of feel like, is it about the body going into ketosis that really makes this LES loosen up? Or is it the fats coming into the system and going past that LES that does something that makes it loosen up just a little bit so it's not tightening up as well? And it seems to happen over a period of days. It's not like this meal made me loosen the LES. It seems like, oh, I had meals for a week or two that were higher in fat, and then I started having some reflux. So pay attention to that and see what works for you. You can see it's really going to vary from person to person. And I feel like the people that have a significant overgrowth in their stomach or their small intestine, those are the people that are usually going to benefit from reducing the carbohydrates. And then there might be some other circumstances that might cause people to really need to increase those carbohydrates a little bit to stop the reflux. But if you feel like you're going to test out, okay, I'm going to test out doing a little bit more carbs, try to stay away from the simple sugars. That one study really showed that reducing the simple sugars, like especially junk food and actual sugar, seemed to improve the reflux symptoms for a wider range of people. So if you test this out, or if you've tested out before, let us know in the comments what worked better for you. Was it really reducing your carbohydrates? Or did you find if you dropped carbohydrates way too low, like on a ketogenic or maybe a carnivore diet, that you actually had a magnification of your reflux? Let us know so we can see the variations that are going on from person to person. And for now, if this whole information about needing to increase stomach acid to stop reflux is new to you, jump over and check out our video on why do I have acid reflux? I hope this helps.